Alright guys, hello and welcome to the PiG Daily, episode number 63, where we're going to talk about Neeb's Oops, I Just Killed You, Protoss vs Zerg Adept opening. It's pretty standard opening. It's just refined to the most ultimate level of amazingness. And we got to see Neeb in the round of 16 in the first group stage of Casper Cup, play against Rogue. Probably his toughest Zerg opponent that he played. He also played against Pet in the later stages. He did a bit better against him. But basically, Neeb walked up to Rogue, was like, hey, here's some Adepts. And Rogue just kind of fell over and died. And it was like kind of funny. And this is something where we've seen this opening win so many games for Neeb. We've seen him play against Hydra. I remember distinctly games from, I don't know if it was like Tours or something like that, where it's like Frozen Temple and Hydra's like, let's defend with Ling Bane, and Neeb's like, here's 7 Adepts, and he just kills all the Zerglings, spreads against the Banelings, and just goes in and massacres all the drones, and just keeps making Adepts and going across the map. Against Roach players, I've seen games where they way over-prepare, his Adepts just refuse to commit, they keep shading around the bases, but never actually fighting, and even though they're not killing drones, they force out so much Roachling, and then just kind of go home, defend the Ravagerling all in, and, you know, he's ahead. It's this beautiful kind of middle ground of pressure, which has worked out so well for him. So I'm going to walk you guys through today a very quick episode showing you how to do the opening and some of the implications in terms of how he does execute it. So let's dive on into game and let's take a look. Now, I'm going to be going off that Frost game in terms of how he does it. There's a lot of different ways you can execute this. As always, I don't have my settings set up properly because I'm a child who cannot mentally prepare himself. But yeah, you can do this in many different timings, many different ways. However, it doesn't really... I mean, we could cover every single way of doing an Adept timing. What we're talking about today is the fastest possible one. The one where you cut a bit of a corner and you basically just play very aggressively with it. You really want to commit hard and you actually skip the Mothership core. So first off, pylon on the low ground on most maps and immediately send that pylon probe to scout. If you do that on time, I'm actually a few seconds late on my pylon and gate, which is why this probe didn't get to block this hatchery. Normally you can block their hatchery. If you prefer to do a gate scout, it makes the build slightly easier to execute, and you can do that as well. But both ways work just fine. Now, you obviously want to go just for the standard 16 gate, 16 gas, super typical stuff. I personally like to put one guy on gas straight away. A lot of the time, Neeb will get 16 on minerals and only then put on gas, but either way is just fine. And you want to be going for that 19 Nexus. Now, you can see here I'm floating money. Wow. Why is your execution so bad, Pig? I did this a bunch of times this morning, and I don't know how this is the best example of it, but for some reason this is the best example of actually getting the order correct. You want to go 19 Nexus, 20 Cybercore, super standard opening. You then go for a gas while restarting probe production. You get your pylon. Probes check that there's no funny business going on. He's like, yeah, okay, I saw what's going on up there. There's nothing too crazy. And then you want to start chrono boosting out Adepts the moment your gateway finishes. This is very important. You need to start chrono boosting that out as well as start your warp gate. And the moment this Adept finishes, I want to swap the chrono boost from the gateway onto that warp gate. Once again, kind of annoyed I chose this replay. Even though everything's in the same order, the proper order, it's a few seconds late. That's all right. So the Twilight Council went down. Notice no Mothership core on the way. And right on about 3 minutes, you want to be about 32, 33 supply. You want to be dropping 2 more gateways. And it's very important you get those down on time. They should go down before the Twilight Council finishes, or right around the same time that the Twilight Council finishes. You then want to start up your glaives, and there's been a gap in the Adept production, and only after you start the glaives, keep the probe production solid, only then do you start this Adept. Notice there's a little gap in my probe production because I'm microing my Adept right now, but we're going to be starting that up in just a moment. Of course, your Adept wants to go scout. We'll talk about that in a moment. For now, let's just focus on the build order. So you're just chilling. Now, at this point, notice you've got only 2 pylons. 1 pylon, 2 pylon. Now, if you wanted to be super safe against potential all-ins, because on this map you've got a wide ramp, you might want to put your 3rd pylon here in your wall and have put one of these gateways that is in the main base down here. But every map's different. That's a very map-specific thing. In general, though, especially if you've got a tighter wall, say on Frozen Temple, you just go straight to that 3rd base and you want to put that 3rd pylon down at the 3rd base as quickly as possible, about 3 minutes 30 usually. Meanwhile, you are also adding a 4th Adept. Notice I lost 1 Adept on his side of the map. Normally you'll keep that alive, but a 4th Adept, and you want to go for that pylon and a Nexus. There we go. Now what's important here, excuse me, is those 4 Adepts should be ready right as Warp Gate research finishes, and this is where all the sexy beautifulness of the build times out. That times out, and you transform all 3 gateways into warp gates at exactly the same time. I'm a few seconds off. Transform. You warp in 3 more Adepts, and you should have 7 Adepts. Of course, like I said, I lost 1, so I've only got 6 here, but otherwise it's the same. And only then, as you're pushing across the map, do you want to start up your mothership core behind this, robotics. I like to start my robo at the 3rd base. That's usually the common position for it. And you just keep on building probes, adding 2 gases on your natural, and then transitioning however the hell you like based on your own understanding of the situation. Now, that's the general build order and the progression, the order you want to do things. I am going to show you a snippet of the VOD where Neeb does it with the beautiful, beautiful timing which he hits, which I couldn't hit after about 5 or 10 games this morning because I'm not Neeb and I'm not a god. Unfortunately, I cannot swim through land just yet. But what's important, what haven't I talked about, what haven't I looked at? Number 1, scouting. You're skipping the mothership core. That's kind of greedy. You've got to really be on top of your scouting. Number 2, on maps with a wide ramp, it does become a bit harder, like I said, because you've got to, change that around. But number 1, what are you going to do with that Adept scout to check you're not being all in, make sure you're safe? And then what are you going to do with your actual Adept pressure and how are you going to use that? Let's take a look in game here. Obviously not the highest level player, but they won't give me Kesper Cup replays unless I don't know. I need to pull off some serious magic to get some Korean League replays, guys. So with your Adept pressure, you want to come in and you want to shade. So that's all good and nice. Let's talk about scouting first of all, though. You normally scout at, what, 3 minutes? Thereabouts? Yeah. Okay, guys, here we are. So, first Adept wants to come straight across that map. Your other Adepts can just rally to the front. They don't need to come across. And his job here is to check what's going on. Oh, you've got a 3rd base. Cool. That's number 1. You're probably not all-inning me, checked off my list. He still could be, though. Now I want to check the drone count. Notice how I always send the shade towards a different mineral line to where I'm poking in. I can always just cancel that shade. And I want to try and check in with this Adept and see what's going on in terms of how many drones are there. Are there drones on this base? Because if he's just on about 10, 15 drones, that's kind of scary. If he's only got drones in the main base, I want to see that. Is he still mining gas in the main? If he's pulled off gas after Zergling speed, that tells me I'm 100% safe because all he can do is build Zerglings. And obviously Adepts are going to be pretty good against Zerglings, so I'm already kind of countering what he can do. But you do want to try and just have a look around, get a feel for what's going on. If you can pick off a drone or 2, that's great. In this case, my Adept went pretty deep, which is why he's going to die. But he kills a few Zerglings, he wastes some mining time. He's acting nice and annoying. We saw some drones there. I didn't really get the full scout, but if I had seen that full mineral line, which I could have just left the Adept back here, shaded the Adept in, checked the drone count and said, oh, there's lots of drones. We're not being super fast all in. Let's just go home. So that's all you need to do. First Adept, check the drone count. Make sure they're building lots of drones. If they are, you're like, cool, continue as normal. If they're not, well, if you can scout the gas, that's nice. If it's just a Zergling all in, just keep making those Adepts and make sure your wall is solid. You'll be fine. Make sure you look for Overlord drops. Adepts will wreck it. But otherwise, you continue with the build. And then we come to that very important moment when your Adepts hit. And this is something where it's pretty obvious what you want to do with these Adepts. You just want to shade into a threatening location while your Adepts hit somewhere else. So your real goal is to be in 2 drone lines at once. And what you've got to understand is that for the Zerg player, the shade is just as threatening as the Adept itself. So if your Adepts are ever in one mineral line and your shades are in another mineral line, the Zerg has the impossible decision where he can't just overly focus on one group. He has to split his army 50-50, and if they're not already on top of them, usually you can then start fighting their army a few guys at a time, especially if it's Zerglings and you get wedged up in the minerals in a nice choke point. So checking this out, we say, oh, he's already got roaches to greet me. Oh, shit. And this is perfect. This is what you need to do as a Zerg player, by the way, is you need to have your roaches out front. However, if it's only like 2 or 3 roaches, just kill them. So notice, if he doesn't chase that shade, I can go in and kill drones, right? But I see he's chasing it with a bunch of roaches. I'm just like, whatever, man. This is just 3 roaches. Even though I've only got 6 Adepts, they wreck these 3 roaches. And then I can keep up the pressure. And remember, you don't necessarily need to kill drones with this. You just need to force lots of units and try to trade a few units off. But here, I go, oh, okay, well, there's nothing on top of the shade. Let's actually commit. And this is when you suddenly hit the money. And this is where you get out of control and you want to put a lot of APM and attention and focus on your Adepts. And that is, once you get in that mineral line, like I said, you're in that dream scenario. You want to shade as soon as you can to another base so that you've got options available to you. I'm pretty slow to get my shade going here. And you want to just kind of move, shoot whenever you can away from those roaches. And we see there, I just kind of win. Thanks, Stukov, for helping me practice the build, by the way. He says, I messed up again, sorry. And that kind of goes badly for him. So that's essentially the build, guys. One thing we want to talk about is you don't build the mothership core until you move out across the map. Okay, so does this create risk with this build? Is this super crazy? Is this really risky? And can you do the build without it? Yes, absolutely. In terms of crisp, sharp adept pressures, the lack of refinement going on ladder at the moment, right through to GM, it kind of astounds me. And I guess part of the reason for that is it's my job to watch, study, and play StarCraft, right? So for me, I spend all day casting StarCraft, watching games, studying, writing down timings, practicing the builds, not just for Zerg anymore, but for all three races. So for me, I've got all this knowledge of these builds. And when I play someone who's got 1,000 games that season in GM, and they hit at like 40 seconds late with their 7 adepts, and I just think like, what the hell, man? I put no pressure on you. Like, how is your build so bad? And yet this happens all the time. Most of the time, up till now, like my Protoss play, not that great. My PvP especially has been lagging behind. It's like starting to pick up. But I've beaten 57, 5800 MMR Zergs on Korea pretty consistently, in PvZ especially, because I would do an opening similar to this for months and months now, and almost every game I would get way ahead with my adept pressure because they'd try to defend with Ling Bane, they wouldn't have the units ready in time, and it would just get out of control. So having a tight, refined build order can make all the difference. Now, keep in mind, that was with me not even skipping the mothership core. If you skip the mothership core, you take this slightly riskier kind of towing the line of greed approach that Neeb does in this specific game, then it gets out of control really fast. You hit so hard. However, if you are going to get the mothership core, how do you adjust the build order? Let's take a quick look at this same replay. I'm not going to show you a game where I do that. I'm just going to show you how I would have done it differently. Go back to about 3 minutes, and that's where things change up. So normally what you do, if you want to squeeze the mothership core in, is you still go single adept into Twilight Council, but your next 100 gas goes into mothership core. And that's how you make your build super safe, a bit more flexible, and if you're someone who's not as high level at defending all-ins, or scouting, or reading your scouting, that's going to make the build a little bit safer for you. Now, keep in mind, that's finished, only 188 gas. If I'd already put 100 gas into the mothership core, I would have to slightly delay my resonating glaives, like 3 or 4 seconds, not a big deal. However, the big problem is actually the minerals. I would have to delay these gateways another 10 or 15 seconds, or I'd have to delay this second adept. So normally what I would do is I'd still always aim for your gateways to be no later than about 3 minutes 10, 3 minutes 15, but skip out on the second adept. So you go straight across the map with the one adept, your mothership core is going to come out soon after to defend any Zerglings that ran around the adept, and only once you've got your 2 extra gateways down, your resonating glaives being chrono boosted, and your warp gate being chrono boosted, only then do you restart that adept production. So you're going to have about 2 less adepts at your first timing, but it's going to be more flexible, and then you can warp in a second round of 3 adepts after warp gate finishes, and you can still have a very strong 8-9 adept pressure. Just hits a little bit later in the game. So guys, that's about it. In terms of Zerg defense, let's give you guys a couple of tips, because Zerg players as well out there defending this horrendously, myself included half the time, especially a few months ago. But I've come up with a set of rules which will allow you to defend this pressure exceptionally well. So a couple of key things which, and maybe there's other views out there, definitely there are other ways to do things. You can just do crazy drops to keep the Protoss pinned back. Maybe you're someone who's elevatoring Zerglings in from 2 sides, or you're doing a big Zergling counterattack on his third, and maybe that works for you at your level. I'm not saying you need to stop doing it. However, if you're wanting to focus on the front-on defensive standard approach where you simply want to stop the adepts in their tracks, well, there's never an easy, I just have enough units, A, move over the top without overcommitting. However, what's very important is a couple of key factors. Number 1, if you're going to be defending front-on, you're not going to keep your opponent back, never start a super fast upgrade. This is very expensive. To build the evolution chamber is effectively 125 minerals and a lava, because it's the drone cost plus the evo cost, and then 100 minerals and 100 gas for an upgrade, which won't kick in until well after that first adept pressure is over. So number 1 rule, do not get an evolution chamber unless, if you want to go this sort of melee build, you've got to be like elevatoring Zerglings, like load 8 Zerglings up, elevator them in, and then as the adepts leave the base, run them into the mineral line. Distract your opponent, pull them home. That's how you can make it work if you want to do fancy stuff with fast melee upgrades or anything like that. But with the front-on defense, whether it's Roaches or Ling Bane, I think Roaches are a little bit more solid. The important thing is to be ready. When these Adepts arrive, you already need creep connecting your second and third bases. This game, we see the creep spreads just started. So what's a good general rule for that? Either your second or third inject on the natural should be skipped, and you should be putting that creep tumor there, spreading that creep towards that third base. If you get that creep there, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So number one is creep spread. Number two is having the units ready in position when they arrive. So what that means is you need to force the shade out early. Remember, I was talking about how the shade needs to threaten 2 locations at once, right? So what the Zerg needs to do then is to stop that ever happening. However, let's think about this in game. If the Adepts are allowed to walk into the third base and then shade towards the natural, the Zerg has failed their mission. If the Adepts walk into the natural and then shade into the main before the fighting starts, the Zerg has failed their mission. The Zerg's job is to engage and force those shades before the Protoss reaches a critical point. So you need to engage outside your base, force the shade out before the Adepts are actually themselves threatening anywhere. This allows you to have a very simple split where you've only got one drone line being threatened. For example, out here on this map would be the perfect area to force the engagement. If you've already got creep out here, that's going to help a lot. And you want about 4 or 5 roaches, probably 5 roaches out here to attack those Adepts. If you force them to shade there, the shade will either barely reach the natural or barely reach the third. It's not going to go any further than that. It allows you to leave those 5 roaches fighting the Adepts. The Adepts will probably have to turn around and run back, or they'll take a lot of damage if they're not microed well. And all the rest of your roaches, or if it's Lingbane, you can do it that way as well, can then engage by chasing those shades. If they commit to the shade, you're going to have units on top of it, and they're going to start losing units very quickly. That allows you to just start killing the units early on. However, like I said, the problem is if they get into one mineral line and then you're on top of them, they can start killing drones while backing away from your units and shading into another mineral line, and suddenly you need to be microing 2 positions at the same time. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to screw up, and you're going to take a lot more losses. So number one, get creep out. Number two, get in a position to force the initial shade out early. So that means having the counter up when they hit. It doesn't mean having banelings morph as they're in your base. No, your banelings need to be pre-morphed. They need to be up front. And force him to shade out early and then run backwards. Your roaches need to be out front, out forward, force the shade out early. That's going to allow you to defend it. The last point is try not to defend with Zerglings. If you are defending with roaches, if you are defending with banelings, obviously you're going to need Zerglings to wrap around. You need to be very careful to make sure you don't just run Zerglings in a few at a time. And your banelings always need to be in a good position to stop the shades, which is why you've got to force the shades out early. As soon as you force them out, the banelings run back chasing that shade. However, with roaches, it's a very specific defense which can be super clean when done correctly. Ideally, you'll have about 5 roaches out front. You'll build maybe up to 12, 13 roaches maximum, unless they're going for like a 7 or 8 gate Adept. You'll just build like 10, 12 roaches. You'll split them up to deal with the Adepts, and in the meantime, you will not build Zerglings. Let's take a look at how this goes. Now, notice in this scenario, he tried to do that. He tried to not build Zerglings. The reason is, in the previous games, every single time these sort of fights would happen, I'd pick off a few Zerglings here, and they do almost no damage. And then every time I'd shade in, he'd A-move his whole army back here, and there'd be Zerglings coming in, a few at a time. Even 10 Zerglings will do almost no damage to these Adepts. Even 30 Zerglings. The Adepts, once they get in these choke points, the Zerglings don't get the surface area, the Adepts move between the minerals, and the Zerglings end up being free kills. And if you think about it, a lot of players will lose like 3 or 4 drones, and they're like, sweet, I held it pretty well. But if you've lost 40 Zerglings in the process, that's the same as losing 20 drones. Because you've spent the lava, you've spent the minerals on it. So why not just build roaches, have enough to know that you are going to shut it down eventually? This is assuming you've got a decent amount of control, of course. And just keep building drones and focus on running your drones away from the Adepts. And by the time you do clean up the Adepts, you'll notice that even if you lose 10, 15, 20 workers, you're still going to be way up on workers from the Protoss, and you're going to be able to play out the macro game. Whereas if you bleed out Zerglings constantly and just feed them into the meat grinder that is a ball of Adepts, you're going to have a very bad day. So guys, I kind of just blabbed on for ages there talking about the defense. I think that pretty much answers all the Zerg questions. Let's see if there's any other questions which I can very quickly answer. Alexa says, Neeb's Adept timing hits as early as 4 minutes 20, right? Okay, guys, yes, I do want to show you guys to finish up the VOD of Neeb doing it because Neeb's a god. And let's talk about that. I was often moving across the map at about 4 minutes 30. 4 minutes 20, 25, sometimes as early as 4 minutes 20. I got my Adepts all warped in and started moving across that map. Now let's take a look at Neeb do this and talk about aspirational timings. You always want to have an aspirational goal, something which you want to aspire to. And trying to copy Neeb's timings is just that. It's something you're probably not going to actually hit in practice, but by copying his build order and working on it, you can steadily close that gap. All of his Adepts are warped in completely at 4 minutes 11, and he starts shading across that map. This is absolutely insane. This is from his game against Rogue, of course, in the Kesper Cup. Big shout out to Spo TV and Kesper for this. I will be linking the VODs, of course, in the thread as per always. Already at 4 minutes 25, Neeb can be in your third base on these close spawns. If it's side spawns, Frost, if it's Frozen Temple. Notice here is what I was talking about. Zerglings suck. If you don't have your Banelings pre-morphed, his Baneling nest literally just finished then Zergling Baneling is not going to work at all. Same with Roaches. If your Roaches aren't ready, you're going to have a bad day. You've got to have those units ready on the specific timing. So these Adepts just get way out of control. Behind this, Neeb adds the Robo, adds the gases on his natural as it gets saturated. He's warping in sentries at home. And he does end up going for a big Gateway Immortal, just Adept Sentry Immortal all in, because he knows he's done so much damage. It's a simple way to kill his opponent. But look at that. Zergling's just so crap at getting rid of the Adepts, and beautiful play there from Neeb. So, of course, if you're playing against pro gamers who are capable of hitting that timing, you probably want to get a 3 minute 35 Roach Warren. For most Zergs on ladder, just 3 minute 50 Roach Warren will be fine, and that should work really well. All right, guys. Have I ever played Neeb on ladder? Not since earlier in the year, much earlier in the year, Big Popper. How would I counter his style? Super clean, efficient defense, and then losing because my mechanic's a lot worse than him. Neeb's on a different mechanical level to me, so I would probably do some sort of all-in attack and try to catch him off guard with some sort of surprise all-in. However, if I had the same mechanics as Neeb, I would do exactly what I talked about, just make sure I have Roaches ready on time to force the shade out early, split them up, and I think I'd have a good shot at it. But thanks for the question there, Big Popper Pump. All right, guys, I appreciate the support. That's the end of the daily. I didn't want it to be a long one. I ended up going longer than I intended because there's a lot to talk about with the details of how the Adepts move around. But when it comes to the build order, it's as simple as I said. It's about non-stop building Adepts out of the gateways with just a very short pause to start your Glaives upgrade, skipping the Mothership Core, getting a fast third pylon and Nexus down at the third base, having it time out so your fourth Adept pops as Warp Gate research finishes. Sorry, I forgot to turn off the notifications. Turning all three into warp gates, warping in 3 Adepts, going across the map, and just hitting this super crisp Adept timing. And like I said, why is it so important to hit hard and fast? Well, now for you Protoss players, you've just heard me talk about how Zergs defend it, and how if they're not in position, and they don't have the units out in time, you should get out of control with the attack. So if they don't force the shade out early, you should feel that feeling of victory rising up inside you. So this is why you cut corners sometimes to make these timings hit so hard. It's because if the Zerg isn't ready for it, no matter how good they are, they're going to take a lot of damage. Hopefully that helped you guys a lot. Hope you enjoy getting some free wins, as I have over the last few months with this style against Zerg players. Zerg players, I really hope you start refining your defense and really getting that creep connecting the bases. Nice. And hope you guys enjoy it. That's all right. I'm going to finish up the show now. Thanks for hanging out. The daily will be on at the normal time tomorrow with ICYFAR. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a watermelon to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.